So we are in lesson number 3 in our booklets. We just had a couple more people walk in. Is there anybody that needs a booklet? We've got extras in the back. So we're going to be looking at lesson number 3, which is the woman at the well. And we're going to be focusing on the text of John chapter 4, verses 4 through 30. So John 4, 4 through 30. And I will go ahead and read through this real quick. And we will dive in. So John chapter 4, starting in verse 4. And I'm going to just start from verse 1. There's no reason not to. So John chapter 4, starting in verse 1. Now when Jesus learned that the Pharisees had heard that Jesus was making and baptizing more disciples than John, although Jesus himself did not baptize but only his disciples, he left Judea and departed again for Galilee. And he had to pass through Samaria, so he came to a town of Samaria called Sychar, near the field that Jacob had given his son Joseph. Jacob's well was there, so Jesus, wearied as he was from his journey, was sitting beside the well. It was about the 6th hour. A woman from Samaria came to draw water. Jesus said to her, "Give me a drink," for his disciples had gone away into the city to buy food. The Samaritan woman said to him, "How is it that you, a Jew, ask for a drink from me, a woman of Samaria? For Jews have no dealings with Samaritans." And Jesus said to her, "If you knew the gift of God and who it is that is saying to you, 'Give me a drink,' you would have asked him, and he would have given you living water." The woman said to him, "Sir, you have nothing to draw water with, and the well is deep. Where do you get that living water? Are you greater than our father Jacob? He gave us the well and drank from it himself, as did his sons and his livestock." And Jesus said to her, "Everyone who drinks of this water will be thirsty." Again, awkward page break there. "Everyone who drinks of this water will be thirsty again, but whoever drinks of the water that I will give him will never be thirsty again. The water that I will give him will become in him a spring of water welling up to eternal life." Verse 15. The woman said to him, "Sir, give me this water so that I will not be thirsty or have to come here to draw water." And Jesus said to her, "Go call your husband and come here." The woman answered him, "I have no husband." And Jesus said to her, "You are right in saying, 'I have no husband.' For you have had 5 husbands, and the one you now have is not your husband. What you have said is true." The woman said to him, "Sir, I perceive that you are a prophet. Our fathers worshipped on this mountain, but you say that in Jerusalem is the place where people ought to worship." Jesus said to her, "Woman, believe me, the hour is coming when neither on this mountain nor in Jerusalem will you worship the Father. Will you worship the Father?" Verse 22, "You worship what you do not know. We worship what we know, for salvation is from the Jews. But the hour is coming and is now here when the true worshipers will worship the Father in spirit and truth, for the Father is seeking such people to worship him. God is spirit, and those who worship him must worship in spirit and truth." The woman said to him, "I know that Messiah is coming, he who is called Christ. When he comes, he will tell us all things." And Jesus said to her, "I who speak to you am he." Just then his disciples came back. They marveled that he was talking with a woman, but no one said, "What do you seek?" or "Why are you talking with her?" So the woman left her water jar and went away into town and said to the people, "Come see a man who told me all that I ever did. Can this be the Christ?" They went out of the town and were coming to him. All right. So our story opens up here with Jesus passing through this Samaritan town of Sychar. He's grown tired from his journey, so he stops at this well, which happens to be the well that was on the land that belonged to Jacob, who then passed it down to his son Joseph. And while at this well, around noon, or the 6th hour, a woman came to the well to draw water. And Jesus requests that the woman give him a drink. So in these first 4 verses of this text, verses 4 through 7, what can we glean just in those 4 verses there, 4 through 7, or 4 through 8? And kind of looking at our board here of setting and characters and what we've been able to identify through plot so far. Yeah, Brian?
Well, number one, unlike Samaria, and of course the Jews avoided the Samaritans, would actually go out of their way to avoid travel into the former northern kingdom.
Yeah. Where's Samaria located, just for reference?
Samaria is Samaria is the capital city, but Samaria is the entire former kingdom of Israel.
Yeah, north of Judah and Jerusalem. Yeah. So traveling from Galilee down to Jerusalem, you would have to either pass through Samaria or route around.
Former 10 tribes, of which it appears to me he's traveling north to go to Galilee.
Okay. What else? Let's stick to setting. So we've got general location of Samaria. Sychar? Yeah. So they're in a town called Sychar. And where at within Sychar? Yeah, Jacob's well. So let's back up just for a moment here. So we're in Samaria. We're talking about the Samaritans. We're talking about the Jews, and we'll dive into this some more as we continue. But just real quick, kind of high-level stuff. What are some things that we know about the Samaritans? Brian? Other Brian?
Yeah.
We're going to spread the mic around.
Samaritans were the people that inhabited the land after the Assyrians took out the Jews from the northern kingdom. And the Samaritans were the people that settled the land and remained there up until the time of Christ. They were a pagan people, and they were frowned upon by the Jews and the remaining Israelites in southern Judea from having any affiliation with. They were Goyim. They were no better than any other foreigners and were treated as such. That's the reason why there was a separation of contact and cultural ties with Samaritans, just like there would be with any other foreigner.
Yeah, so when the Assyrians came in and devastated the nation of Israel, you had the northern tribes of Israel, the southern tribes of Judah. There were some remaining that were not exiled out of the physical land. So those remaining people of Israel were what we know as the Samaritans in the New Testament. And also during this Assyrian rule and captivity, the Assyrians also brought foreign people in to settle in this land where the Samaritans were still inhabiting. Am I saying that right? Inhabiting. Sounded weird. And they mixed. They intermarried. They were no longer just the people from Israel, but they were now this. They had different culture, different practices, different worship. They adopted Mount Gerizim as their holy place, as opposed to the temple that was in Jerusalem. So where they're located here in Sychar was near the near Mount Gerizim. So it's also significant in that sense for this Samaritan woman. And if I'm not mistaken, the Samaritans viewed Jacob as they kind of put him on a pedestal also. So this being the land that was Jacob's is also very significant to the Samaritans also. Anything else that anybody would like to share or add to? Yeah, or Michael?
It's been mentioned already, but I've heard people describe the way Samaritans were looked at as like half-breeds or like lesser people, from the Jewish standpoint, from those in Judea, where they could claim, I guess, a pure lineage and were proud of that. So that's a dynamic that filters into this story.
Yeah, and I think it's worth saying too that it went both ways, this disdain for each other. Because the Samaritans viewed the Jews as people who were defiled while they were off in exile, and then they came back to the land. And add in the religious differences and where they placed the authority of, not authority, but the importance of where they worshiped and all these other things, and you see kind of how they butted heads and would clash with each other. Is there another comment? Yeah, Brian.
I would just say that Isaiah in chapter 9 prophesied of the Messiah coming to the land of Naphtali and Zebulun, which is a Gentile land. And so, in essence, it's been 500 years, I suppose, or longer, that the Assyrians conquered Israel and deported their people. So it was largely Gentile. And I still get confused as how in the world Galilee, that province, got established there in the center, but it was a Jewish and Gentile area, which is perfect for Jesus.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Okay. Sorry. So how about characters? Who do we see as our characters in this story? Jesus and the woman and disciples. Yeah, and the disciples really don't come into play until the end of the story. For the bulk of this narrative, it's just the woman and Jesus. They're by themselves having this conversation. Yes, thank you. Townspeople at the end also.
Justin, I had one more thing on I guess you could put it in setting that it was the 6th hour.
Yeah, noon. No, that's good. I'm glad you mentioned that.
Does that mean 6th hour since the sun came up?
I believe so, yeah. So the first 3 hours of the day, it takes you to 9 a.m., and then to the 6th hour would be noon.
So it probably is hot.
Yeah, so I think they consider their day starting at 6 a.m., basically. Yeah, Steve?
It's probably worth noting that these people, these Samaritans, built their own temple. And the Jews burned it down. They destroyed it in 168 BC. So they were also eclectic. They were superstitious people. They were conspiracy theorists, if you will. You know, we know about that today, right? So when you take the physics of this, when you take, the Jews with their strict legalism, and you put it with this quote-unquote liberal bunch of Samaritans that had the gall and audacity to build their own temple, for crying out loud, which the Jews burned down, you can understand why there would be, some problems between the Republicans and the Democrats, right?
Yeah.
That was a lot the reason why they hated each other. And the fact is that when you look at the way that the Samaritans worshiped, it was a combination of the law of Moses and these superstitions that they had developed through the years. So what happens is these strict so-called, live by the book Jews really looked at the Samaritans as, worthless as it regards holding to the faith type thing.
Yeah, and if I remember right, the Samaritans, they recognized the Pentateuch, so the first 5 books of the Bible. Beyond that, though, they didn't recognize any of the prophets or other writings past that point. And that's where you start to get the other stuff that kind of mixes in with how they worshiped and what they believed. Yeah. All right. So how about this? We're going to kind of dive into some of the plot here, and I think we kind of work through sequentially conflict, rising action, and climax and resolution. But this initial encounter between Jesus and the woman, what are some of the observations that you have here? How their conversations start, some of the initial things that they talk about. Brian?
The focus of their conversation is upon water. She speaking of physical water, and Jesus speaking of living water, spiritual water that he would have available for all people. But Jesus starts out the conversation asking her of water, which surprises her because here you have a Jew talking to a Samaritan, and a woman no less.
I just wanted to say that the conversation is going to have to start from Christ. And you know that because of what the woman said to him right after he requested of her a drink of water. And this is where we get the idea of cultural distinctions and interplay between the two different peoples, so that the woman's not going to strike up a conversation first.
Yes, Jesus initiates. What else? Anything that you find interesting? Yeah, before Brian goes, so to add on to Brian's comment about Jesus initiating the conversation, in the woman's responses to Jesus, she seems very eager to talk. She's just, after Jesus initiates, she doesn't seem to have an issue with having a conversation with him until a certain point that we're going to get to later, where it takes a more personal turn towards the woman herself. But I think that that's interesting too, that she doesn't seem to have any hindrance in having this in-depth conversation with him. Yeah, Brian?
I was just going to say that Jesus does introduce the conversation by asking for water, which would logically indicate that he's looking for water from the well. And then she responds in the way that she did, "Why are you talking to me, a woman, and asking me of water?" And then Jesus changes the inflection in the conversation. He says, "If you knew who I was, I would give you living water." And that's what gets her really going. And subsequently thereafter, he reveals to her prophetically her life history, confirming that he's the Messiah.
Yeah, so I think we're kind of moving into rising action here. So the conflict that we see is this initial conversation. The woman's like, "Why are you talking to me?" So that kind of goes back to what we were talking about in the context of Samaritans and Jews. But also the conflict of this idea of the water, right? She's talking about physical water. He's talking about this spiritual living water. So then we start to get into more of their dialogue back and forth, and you can kind of see the plot and conflict rise at this point as it's approaching its climax. So what else do we see as we continue into their conversation?
Confusion. over what's living water and how can I obtain this living water?
Yeah, so the living water. Yeah, what is it? How do I get it? Can you give it to me? Albert?
Just as we had with the reading last week, I perceive you're a prophet, and then she jumps into a question that apparently is on her mind, and so you see, as in last week, something is up, and what I have believed, what I've been taught, is rattling apart with this Jesus, and she didn't know, or I don't know that she knew, but just perceived he had a gift from God, and then through a question that was vexing her, as we had in the reading last week. So Jesus again shows he's different.
Yeah. And we've kind of touched on this, but I want to reiterate that, this started as a simple request of Jesus asking for water. And then Jesus jumps at the opportunity to evangelize and spread his message to her, right? He doesn't hesitate in doing that. So he kind of creates that opportunity through this conversation. And I want to reread verses 10 through 15 real quick. So starting in verse 10, Jesus answered her, "If you knew the gift of God and who it is that is saying to you, 'Give me a drink,' you would have asked him, and he would have given you living water." The woman said to him, "Sir, you have nothing to draw water with, and the well is deep. Where do you get that living water? Are you greater than our father Jacob? He gave us the well and drank from it himself, as did his sons and his livestock." And Jesus said to her, "Everyone who drinks of this water will be thirsty again, but whoever drinks of the water that I will give him will never be thirsty again. The water that I will give him will become in him a spring of water welling up to eternal life." And the woman said to him, "Sir, give me this water so that I will not be thirsty or have to come here to draw water." So immediately in his response to her, he changes the focus of the conversation from the earthly, physical, to the spiritual. He shifts the focus of the conversation. And at this point, she realizes that Jesus didn't even have anything to draw water with. And he came to the well. It's noon. It's hot out. You would have thought that he would have maybe had been somewhat prepared. So, you could presume that Jesus was seeking an opportunity. He knows he's in Samaria. He knows the land that he's on. And it's the hottest part of the day. Surely somebody's going to be coming by, and there's going to be an opportunity there. And then she goes on to ask, where is it that this living water comes from? So Jesus, again, redirects her to the spiritual. This water that you can get from the well, it's great. It's going to quench your thirst. But then you're going to be thirsty again. The living water that I have to offer, from that you'll never be thirsty again. So he's trying to redirect her understanding of this isn't typical water that we're talking about. We're not talking about this physical water here at the well. So again, shifting to the spiritual. Yeah.
Woman who had had 5 husbands, but she no doubt had no issue at all speaking to a man. And more than likely, there was a touch of sarcasm here. You never hear that when this is taught. But the more I look at it and the more I think about it, sermons that I've tried to put together on it would lead me to believe that she was building in her sarcasm until, as you would say, that climactic point in which she realized that this is not like other men. The same realization, Justin, that many in the New Testament had when they met Jesus. No one speaks like him. I've never heard anyone speak like him. So I think that maybe we should at least give that some thought. Maybe there was just an air of sarcasm there.
Yeah, I think that's reasonable. Yeah. Albert?
You know, scripture keeps coming to mind is let him who has ears listen. And so to us, we have the message complete, and to us it's obvious that he's talking about a higher thing. But in that situation at that time, you see that if you're truly listening and wanting to know truth, you will decipher his message or she would decipher the message that he's giving to her. But I just reminded of that scripture, let him who have ears listen. And so, simple words, great example. But if your heart is hardened or you're not interested and engaged into it, you're just gonna, that man's crazy, and I'll give you your water and I'm leaving. I'm going back to the house.
Yeah. I think we kind of see the patience of Jesus here too, and he reiterates what he says multiple times, and he keeps redirecting her. And then we see the big shift, right, that Steve was talking about. Let's go ahead and I'm gonna, since we have so many verses that we're looking at, I'm gonna reread another section here, and we can focus on it. So I'm gonna look at verses 16 through 26. Starting in verse 16, Jesus said to her, "Go, call your husband and come here." And the woman answered him, "I have no husband." Jesus said to her, "You are right in saying, 'I have no husband.' For you have had 5 husbands, and the one you now have is not your husband. What you have said is true." The woman said to him, "Sir, I perceive that you are a prophet. Our fathers worshipped on this mountain, but you say that in Jerusalem is the place where people ought to worship." Jesus said to her, "Woman, believe me, the hour is coming when neither on this mountain nor in Jerusalem will you worship the Father. You worship what you do not know, and we worship what we know, for salvation is from the Jews. But the hour is coming and is now here, when the true worshipers will worship the Father in spirit and truth, for the Father is seeking such people to worship him. God is spirit, and those who worship him must worship in spirit and truth." And the woman said to him, "I know that Messiah is coming, he who is called Christ. When he comes, he will tell us all things." And Jesus said to her, "I who speak to you am he." All right. So, kind of an interesting connection here, I think. With the conversation focused around being physically around the well, focused on water. If you're going to a well for water, what's the primary reason that one would be seeking water? You're thirsty, right? Yeah. What is Jesus doing in these redirections with this woman?
He's taking the physical needs that we have for daily life, and he's directing them also toward your spiritual needs, daily life, what
Yeah.
you need on a spiritual side. You thirst? Well, you need physical water. Your spirit also needs a water, and I can provide that.
Exactly, yeah. And you see this shift in this text where Jesus is getting much more personal now, right? He says, "Go get your husband." Oh, that's right, you don't have a husband. But actually, you've had 5 husbands, and the man you're with now isn't even your husband. So he's shifted the conversation now to be much more personal, and he's showing her, you are thirsty. This is the water that you actually need, right? So he's showing what is lacking in her life from a spiritual standpoint. I just thought it was interesting that this whole, being at the well physically, the conversation around water and focusing on water, and kind of, yes, you might be thirsty for physical water, but you're spiritually thirsty as well, and here's what you need for that. Okay. What other comments do you guys have up to this point? There's a lot of, it's we're getting into some deep text. So I want to give an opportunity to dive in if we need to. Brian?
I would just say that when he makes this thing about this disclosure about living water, she still doesn't get it, whether she's being facetious or cynical or asking legitimately. She's saying, well, then give me water so I don't have to thirst and I won't have to come to this stinking well anymore. And then Jesus begins to reveal who he is. He doesn't say, I'm the Messiah. He discloses things about her life only, well, for lack of a better word, miraculously understanding the intimate details of her marital situation. And then that segues, her question is, well, where are we? You're a prophet, you're a man of God. Where are we supposed to worship? We worship in this mountain, you worship in Jerusalem. And then Jesus, therefore, starts making disclosures about soon it'll be neither place, of which obviously we're witnesses of that right now, because we're the temple of God and we worship in our flesh as we assemble with each other.
Yeah, and in her response to him and asking him this question about, where's the right place to worship, you could almost see like that's kind of like a knee-jerk reaction. If you think about our discourse today, it can be so common to just jump into a question of debate. The age-old question, is it Gerizim or is it Jerusalem? And Jesus doesn't sidestep the question. He answers the question in saying, look, the Jews are right. That's where salvation is from. But this is what's important. And the hour is now here that it's not going to matter whether it's Gerizim or Jerusalem. What matters now is matters of the heart. I just think that the way that he crafts this conversation and navigates it is really interesting, and something that we can apply in our own opportunities for evangelism. Yeah.
Well, one of the things that may be helpful in this particular text, is because a lot of people make a lot about it, is that this word that is so commonly rendered as husband in most of our English translations, it's the Greek word andra, from the Greek word aner, and so it simply means man. So she said, I have no man. He said, it's true, you have had 5 men, but the one you have now is not your man, meaning the one that God has joined you to. So a lot of times people talk about, well, it's okay for her to have 5 husbands. Why can't I have 3? So, this is a text that is commonly gone to. So that would help us in our understanding, because when people start saying, well, it says husband, well, we have to understand that there was only one Greek word for the word man and the word husband. Same with the word woman or wife. Yeah. And context has to determine that. So Jesus is not saying that you have legitimately had all 5 of them. He just points out that the one you're with now is not the one man that God has joined you to.
Right.
Outside of whatever else may have been the case.
Yeah. No, that's great. Thank you. Yeah. Steve?
So anybody that knows anything about Jewish law, God's word, and water knows that water has always been that which cleanses us. And she indeed needed that water for the very reasons that were just spoken. So, you talk about spirit and the word, you talk about this living water. It's this living water that's always cleansed. And she needed that cleansing. And it's the same water that brings us cleansing. And I think there's a powerful message there.
Yeah, definitely. Was there another comment? I'm not sure if I saw another hand over there. Okay.
I don't mean to completely change the trajectory, but Jesus says he's the Messiah here.
Yeah.
That's a big claim, and it's a big deal. So that hadn't been mentioned yet, but as we move along in the text, she speaks of the Messiah, so she knows who the Messiah is. I'm sorry.
No, that's great.
Ruined it.
No, no, that's perfect. Yeah, so Jesus, bluntly tells her, I am he. I am the Messiah that you're talking about. I also think it's interesting that she was aware and seemingly anticipating that there would be a Messiah at some point. But yeah, is it significant that Jesus says this at this point, especially in his ministry? How often has he just bluntly said that I am the Christ or I am the Messiah? Yeah. Yeah.
I would say not very often did he say, I am the Messiah, and certainly we understand by the trials of the Jewish leaders looking for witnesses that no Jewish leader ever witnessed Jesus proclaiming he was the Messiah, hence their need to have Jesus make the good confession.
Yeah. Albert, did you have something?
Backtracking, but in verse 12, when she asks the question, are you greater than our father Jacob, who gave us this well, and to the credit of Mike, who teaches high school this Wednesday, or this past Sunday on chapter 3 of Hebrews, that's addressed. Moses had charge of God's house, but how much better is the person who built the house? And so this is addressed again, and it's still a challenge, as we see in Hebrews, for people today to grasp Jesus and how he came to save man, and not the angels from chapter 3, but he came to save man, came to this earth and felt everything. But yeah, in chapter 3 of Hebrews, it addresses he built the house that he has in charge of. And so it's just interesting. It struck me that she's asking, are you better than Jacob? Yeah. Yeah, he's not saying that, but time and time again, we see that he is.
Yeah, and to kind of tack on to that, and going back to Steve's comment earlier about, if you think about the conflict between the Samaritans and the Jews, the Jews came and they destroyed the temple that the Samaritans had, and I would imagine that there wasn't a lot of friendly discourse between the two parties. But not only is Jesus saying that I'm greater than Jacob, I am the Messiah, but what I have to offer, I'm offering to you as well, not just the Jews. And I think that that's significant. And I think that would have been, that would have pierced her also. Yeah.
Didn't believe him. The Samaritans did.
Yeah.
You just keep on reading, and you're going to see that they believed him based upon what he said, not what she said, what he said. So here you've got the eclectic, superstitious Samaritans who only live, as the Jews thought, by just a little portion of God's law. Rather, they had made up a bunch of stuff and had the gall and audacity to build their own temple. And they recognize who he is. I think that's powerful. And I think we should look in the mirror and we should consider ourselves as we think about this picture that's in front of us and who he's dealing with and how he's dealt with them.
Yeah. I think that was the first bell. Let's see. Find my place in my notes. Okay, so we're at the climax. Jesus says, yes, I am the Messiah. I am he. What's the resolution that we see in this narrative? What comes next?
The woman leaves and goes and proclaims Christ.
Yeah. Yeah. So she apparently believes, right? Based off what he said. So she believes. Yeah, could this...
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
Could this
No.
be the Messiah?
That's a good point.
Yes.
Let me backtrack a little
change
bit.
that. I was wrong.
So she shares, right? She goes and shares it with the townspeople. And then they come. So, and to the point that Steve made too about the Samaritans coming to believe based off of what Jesus is saying. How many miracles did Jesus perform in front of the Jews? The Jews. Yeah, I have no idea. I know he did a lot though, right? How many miracles did he perform in front of her? You could maybe perceive that because he knew her history, that would be miraculous. But, that's not like the, big fireworks, right? It's kind of a more subtle detail. But you see the willingness and the open heart that the Samaritan people in this narrative have. And you contrast that with everything that Jesus showed the Jewish people and the Jewish leaders to say as evidence of who he is, and they didn't believe.
I can see a parallel here between the Samaritan woman, Gentile, and Nicodemus. They're both in the same boat. Nicodemus says, no man could do this unless he be of God. She's saying, can this be the Christ? Because obviously she perceived him to be a prophet. The difference between the two is that Nicodemus crept up to Jesus in the night to conceal himself, and I don't see him doing any evangelizing. But here you had this sinful Samaritan woman publicly declaring and doing so much good in revealing the Messiah to this Gentile town.
Yeah. All right. Well, I think that takes me to pretty much the end of our notes, or my notes. But does anybody else have any final comments? Or yeah, Terry.
It can be also noted that when Jesus was also thinking about his disciples at the end, because they came, and that will also be discussed in the next lesson, that we're bringing you food, but he was doing what he came to earth to do, to evangelize and to be example for all of us.
Yeah, no, that's great. And one thing I would add too is with when the woman leaves to go and tell the townspeople, is there a detail there that you think might be significant? Yeah, she left her water jar. So you see a sense of urgency, because I would imagine that you're carrying this thing back and forth. There's going to be some importance to your tools, right? I doubt that she had too many to spare, but she just left it, and she went and told the people immediately, and I think that that's significant too. So I think that's all I've got. The second bell should be ringing here in just a moment. So we will have a short hiatus on this class. The next 2 Wednesdays happen to fall on a holiday, and we're going to have special services on those days. So our next lesson, which will be lesson number 4, will be in the first week after the new year, that Wednesday. All right, thank you.